Call this meeting to order. First order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion made by Chair Iverson and seconded by Chair Pedersen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the April 18th Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second. I'll second.
Motion made by Commissioner Iverson and seconded by Commissioner Ream. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Moving on to our discussion items. Tonight we have two discussion items on the agenda. Our first discussion item is item 3.1, zoning code amendment for zoning code section 8.9 to allow for privacy fence inside a secondary front yard of corner lots. This item does include a public hearing. This presentation will begin with the staff presentation regarding the proposed zoning text amendment. Then the Planning Commission will open the podium for any public comment to the commission. At that time, please state your name, address. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Please do not repeat any already addressed comments to the commission to allow for those in attendance to speak. Please note that the Planning Commission does not engage in back and forth discussion during public comment. After public comment, the Planning Commission will then close the public hearing and the discussion of the zoning text amendment and make recommendations for the City Council. I will now turn it over to Associate Planner Will Butcher for a staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Will Buhiger, the Associate Planner, and today I'm presenting item 3.1 for the zoning code amendment, specifically for section 18-9 for fences and retaining walls. To give a background on the zoning code amendment, we have Lori Becker, who is here with us tonight, who submitted a fence permit application on May 16th of this year for a fence at her property at 1105 77th Street West. Her property is located on the corner of 77th Street and Cochia Lane. The fence in question was a 6-foot white vinyl privacy fence. The purpose of the fence was for privacy and also to act as a sound barrier for traffic going down Cochia Lane. The reasoning for the code amendment, though, is because per section 18-9, a rear yard boundary or privacy fence is permitted only within a rear yard. And in our definition section of the zoning code, section 16-1, a corner lot is considered to have 2 front yards. Both sides abutting the street are required to meet front yard setbacks of the zoning district. As shown right here, this is 1105 77th Street in between both 77th Street and Cochia Lane. Per our zoning code and definitions of a corner lot, Lori would be unable to have a privacy fence going down the stretch here of Cochia Lane out of her house. She would only be able to have a privacy fence from the corner going down to the side of her house. Any area around here of her secondary front yard would be illegible to have a privacy fence. Lori came to the planning staff and was hopefully trying to get a variance application, but staff advised for a zoning code amendment instead, because with multiple properties around that also were having a corner lot, a zoning code amendment seemed more reasonable in place instead of a variance application. So tonight, staff and Lori have presented a zoning code language that I'll read off, but the original code language is for 18-9. Staff has advised we'd rather change the code language for the zoning code for fences rather than the definition of corner lots. The original code read that a rear yard boundary or privacy fence is only permitted within a rear yard. Staff and Lori have proposed instead to change the language to read, a privacy fence is permitted within a front yard, is prohibited within a front yard, but may be installed within a corner lot's secondary front yard with a 10-foot setback from the property line adjacent to the street. Planning, engineering, and Public Works have reviewed this language and decided that there's no adverse effects from the language being proposed. In our zoning code language at the very bottom, we also have a section that reads, any corner lot, no fence or retaining wall will be erected 15 feet from the intersection at the corner of the lot the traffic is visible were to be impaired. So there would be no issues with any clear view triangles of the privacy fence being proposed for any residents in the future hoping to have a privacy fence. And with the 10-foot setback that staff has advised, we don't see any results of traffic visibility issues or any public works infrastructure or roadways or plows in the future as well to adhere. So staff is going to need approvals for the zoning code amendment for ordinance 462 ZC and a resolution approving the summary publication. Staff is recommending holding a public hearing on this issue, and staff is also recommending a vote to recommend approval of ordinance 462 ZC to the city council. We have sample motion here for both the ordinance amendment and the recommendation to the resolution approving the summary publication. I am now open for questions at this time from the planning commission.
I will, or do you want to open thank you, but we will open the public hearing at this time.
Can I ask a couple questions first?
Yes.
These just city streets or city streets that intersect with state highways or county roads?
At the moment, staff is proposing this is going down Cochilla Lane, so
That's a collector street, that is a city street.
Okay. And I'm just saying for the ordinance sake, is it also going to be for streets where you may be intersecting with a county road or state highway? Highway 7, Highway
Yeah.
5?
Chair and Commission, I can help answer that question. So this zoning amendment, I think to your question, would apply to everywhere in the city that you have a single family residence with a corner lot. And so if you're applying for a fence application and you have the case where you have a county road intersecting, forming a corner lot, we would have to look at which lot is the secondary front yard or the corner yard. And then if it were on the county road side, you would be able to have a fence on that side.
Okay. My only question is safety for turns, especially on streets where they're going 45, 50 miles an hour versus the 25 miles an hour. Yeah, you can see around the corner pretty easily, but if people are cooking, I wasn't 100% sure if we're comfortable with having that possible view blocked for faster streets. But if staff feels it's fine, I'm all right with it.
Chair and Commission, just one other observation perhaps. So in most cases with roads that have higher design speeds, you're going to have a wide enough right-of-way to accommodate for some shoulder area as well. So with the 10-foot setback plus the shoulders, by the time you get to the curb, that's a pretty wide.
Agreed. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open a public hearing. Is there anyone in the chambers this evening who wishes to comment on this item? Okay, after hearing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second.
motion's been made by Commissioner Iverson and seconded by Commissioner Ream. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The motion carries and the public hearing is now closed. I'll now open the floor for the planning commission to discuss the commission with any comments or any questions about this ordinance change.
Could we go back to the image of the property? So what I understood is it's kind of to the side of the house, maybe at the the pitch of the roof is kind of where the idea of adding it, and that's the definitional change?
That would be the definitional change because the 2 points of the house, that right there would actually be showing as the right here and right here of the corners of the home going down here. That would be the points making the secondary front yard. Behind this corner right here, this would be then considered the rear yard of the property. But for our definitions of a corner lot, this would then be a secondary front yard. So with that, with the original ordinance there, we wouldn't be able to have a privacy fence in that.
So Will, could you, I mean, as an example for this property, the fence would go from, it would, how far could they go toward 77th Street?
Towards 77th Street, toward the front of the property there.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it just
that-
to the front of the garage or?
Well, with the
Is it all
secondary
the way
front
to the
yard, it would
property?
be the point right here and right there. This would be shown as the front, the primary
Right.
front yard. Past this corner here going down, this would be shown as the secondary front yard there. So if she wanted to go in front of the primary face of the home there, that would be the primary front yard, which would be prohibited with also the code. With the secondary front yard,
With this
Yes.
code, but with this code change,
Mm-hmm.
where, I'm trying to figure out where you could start that fence on the secondary front yard to not encroach the front yard.
Basically from the driveway down, right?
okay,
Right?
say that again.
From the driveway down on our screen?
With the original code, it said that a rear yard or rear yard boundary or privacy fence is permitted only within a rear yard. Within that code right there, even a side yard in right here in this section would have been prohibited. So a privacy fence specifically would only be allowed in the rear yard here of the 2 points of the corner house going down. So with this change, it allows for a privacy fence to go into the secondary front yard or the side yard of this home, or only the side yard, secondary front yard. So the original language shown that a privacy fence is permitted only within that rear yard. So now with this new code language, we're allowing for the secondary front yard.
Be that one corner right there.
But where's the secondary front yard start? That's my question.
Yeah.
Show them it starts here and then goes.
Yeah. So the secondary front yard would be this first corner of the house here
Okay,
going down. That's the secondary front yard.
okay. That's not the edge of the driveway.
No, not the edge of the driveway. That's the primary front yard there. That would be prohibited.
Okay. That's why I'm just trying to clarify
Oh, no.
on, for future, ordinance change, people that come in, where you're considering the secondary front yard starting, and it's that corner of the house.
Yep. Staff is seeing this, the corner of the house here, this almost line there. That's how staff interprets a secondary front yard.
If I may, just for this specific instance, I live on 77th Street, and so a fence there would not really obstruct vision at all. I pull out of 77 to get to work every day, and I mean, a fence there is totally reasonable in my opinion, just to prevent noise pollution, especially with the expansion on Cochia towards Holy Family. I think it would overwhelmingly be beneficial for the homeowner. But again, that's just for this specific instance.
Okay,
Would you like me to clarify exactly where the fence is gonna be and how many feet back it is from all the points that you're concerned about?
That'd be great, I'd appreciate that.
Would you like to hear that?
sure, you can come up and explain your lot and where you're looking at.
All right, I'm Lori Becker, and my husband Dan, I thank you for inviting us. Okay, so the lot is on the corner of Cochia and 77th. And where our fence will be is if you look at the 77th Street, and you're on the street looking towards the home. Okay, so that means the garage will be to the right and up a little bit, okay? It's 95 feet from the curb to where the fence would start. It won't go that way, it'll start there. And then it'll go out towards Cochia. Now, on Cochia, we have a 10-foot setback, a 10-foot easement, and then we're gonna go another 2 feet in from the property line. So it'll go from that corner straight down. And then across the bottom will be about 40, I'm guessing 40, 41 feet from the back of the property. And then it'll go straight to the property line, but we'll be in about 2 to 3 feet from the property line next door to our neighbor, so that we can get equipment back there, you know, lawnmowers and whatever he or us need it. So that, and then that would go straight to the back of the house and stop at the corner of the house. So it's a smaller, it's not on the property lines at all. It's a smaller area. It's within the property lines though. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay, all right, thank you.
thank you.
Chair, just to reiterate, this code amendment will be for all corners.
For all properties,
All
right,
properties.
right, that's
Want to
why
make sure
I,
everyone.
right. It's for all properties, but thank you for clarifying where you were looking at putting your fence.
I think the concern that we had mostly was the 95 feet off.
I can't have you talk like that. I gotta have you up at the mic, because we don't have a house mic.
The concern, I think, that we had when we were looking at the fence placement was to make sure we didn't, and thank you, sir, for, you know, expressing that. We did not take away the view onto Cochia, because people do fly down Cochia, there's no doubt about it. And so we're 95 feet back and 22 feet in, so that gives plenty of room for people to edge up and see the traffic.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments, questions?
You know, I would only say, I drove past the location this morning, and as the other commissioner had stated, that my interpretation of the placement, and you will want some privacy with Cochia, because that will be a fast pace, and that will generate an awful lot of traffic at the same time. And we're here to solve problems, not make problems, so.
Any other questions? Can I get a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to recommend the city council to adopt resolution authorizing summary publication of ordinance 462 ZC.
Second.
We have motion made by Commissioner Sequoia and seconded by Commissioner
Westman.
Westman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our second item tonight,
Chair, we have two items here this evening. You need a motion
Oh, I need a
regarding the
motion on
ordinance
the-
proposed.
okay, I need a motion on the second.
Sure. I'll make a motion to recommend to city council the adoption of ordinance 462 ZC, amending zoning code section 18-9 to allow privacy fences to be built within a corners lot's secondary front yard with a 10-foot setback from the property line adjacent to the street.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Sequoia and seconded by Commissioner Pedersen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our second item tonight is item 3.2. Roars Victoria Mixed Use Development, preliminary plat, PUD, a shoreline CUP, and a shoreline variance. This item does include a public hearing. This presentation will begin with a presentation regarding the proposal zone text amendment. Then the planning commission will open the podium for public comment to the commission. Again, at that time, state your name and address. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. And please do not repeat something that's already been addressed to the commission to allow for opportunity for all those in attendance that wish to speak. Please note, the planning commission does not engage in back and forth discussion during public comment. After public comment, the planning commission will close the public hearing and discuss the proposed item to make recommendations to the city council. I will now turn it over to planning consultant from Bolton and Mink, Nathan First, for a staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. So I am happy to present the Roars Victoria Mixed Use Development Preliminary Plat, PUD, Shoreline CUP, and Shoreline Variances. So those list of 4 requests are what we are reviewing this evening as the Planning Commission. One really quick thing to note that the developer has requested business or a subsidy for the project through tax increment financing. That is not something that is within the Planning Commission scope for review. Just know that that application is on file with the city, and if you have questions, please work with the city's Community Development Director. Okay, so in terms of the development process, I think you're all pretty familiar with this slide. We are here, which is at the preliminary plat stage. This is really the second stage of the development process. This is where we work through a lot of the details on developments. Associated with this, we have a planned unit development. The PUD process is really meant to allow for innovative, creative, and flexible development sensitive to existing conditions, environmental, cultural, and economic. So a little bit about the location. I'm sure most folks in the room are familiar with the site. This entire site includes 7 existing parcels. Includes also some existing right-of-way. So when if the project comes forward for final approvals, right-of-way vacations would be required. In total, the site will be just over 2.5 acres at 2.64. And then the uses proposed here, we have got a multifamily development project along with some mixed commercial use. So 125 apartment dwellings with 1,700 square feet of commercial space proposed. In total, the developer has included 258 parking spaces, and we'll talk about all of that in much more detail later in this presentation. So the existing conditions on the site, as I said, I'm sure most folks are familiar and have seen the structures and existing conditions, but there are a number of different structures, including houses, outbuildings, barn, and then gravel surfaces for parking and drive. There is a significant grade change on the north of this parcel as you transition down into the trail. And so in that area, you do have some wooded areas with various tree species. I think the developer has actually concluded their environmental remediation review, and so that would move forward. Any required environmental remediation would take place after final approvals. So the city has reviewed this development proposal previously in the sketch plat review phase. First, this was reviewed at the city's planning commission in January. The developer heard from the planning commission at that time some comments on the size of the building, the amount of parking provided, the location and amount of retail space. This project then went to the city council for review later in January. Since that time, the developer has made a number of different revisions, meeting with city staff to help figure out how to incorporate some of that feedback. And what you see on the screen now is what they have proposed, which incorporates some of that feedback. The developer and their team are here this evening to explain some of the changes, and I'll talk about a number of these things as well throughout this presentation. So on the screen here, you see, so on the former screen, this slide here, this is a rendering of the project from Rose Street and Arboretum or Highway 5, looking at the retail area and the kind of one of the sides of the building. And here is the site plan. So you can see sort of an L-shaped building which runs north to south along Rose Street and then along the north side of the property. There's surface parking internal to the site that is visible from Highway 5 as proposed. And then lastly, I should also note that there is some on-street parking proposed here on Rose Street. So if you look at this image on the site plan, you'll see, put the cursor over it. The developer is actually proposing to reconstruct Rose Street, and they would move it further to the west in order to integrate on-street parking into Rose Street. This is to help provide more public parking, and we'll talk about the parking count as well. So I have on the screen the preliminary plat, and this is just here to show you what this looks like. Really note that it's quite busy. There's a lot going on here with respect to the property boundaries, right-of-way that would have to be vacated, and so just to note that. So I want to talk really quickly at a high level about some of the land uses proposed here and how they relate to the city's policies. So the uses proposed: multifamily residential, 125 units of multifamily housing, and 8,700 square feet as proposed of commercial space. The developer is looking, as far as we know, at retail and service uses primarily for this space. So there are some conditional use permits required under the city's zoning. So one of those things is the building height. So in the central business district, buildings are limited to 35 feet unless they have a conditional use permit to allow them to go over that. So that is being requested here. Multifamily residential also requires a conditional use permit. And lastly, there are conditional use permits required for the shoreland uses as well. And so that would be commercial and multifamily. So at a high level, how does this relate to the city's comprehensive plan? We first start with looking at the density of the proposal. The density in this case is 47.31 units per acre. So we're taking the net developable area and contrasting that with the amount of units proposed. This is smack dab in the middle of the city's allowable density range, which in this area is 24 to 75 units per acre. So something else to mention about the comprehensive plan is that this particular future land use category guides for a couple different types of development. One is smaller scale retail or office buildings, and another is vertical mixed use buildings with retail or office uses on the ground floor and other uses, including residential, on upper floors. The comprehensive plan also talks about gateways, and so I won't go over what all of this says, but in summary, looking at high-profile commercial nodes, making sure that they have an eye towards design, quality design, that is, quality landscaping, things that present Victoria well. So the city's comprehensive plan also includes a reference to the city's downtown master plan. This is important because this site is included, obviously, within that downtown master plan. It's shown in red on the slide in front of you. On the right of this slide, there are a number of different goals articulated within the downtown master plan for the downtown area. And in looking through them, a number of them are addressed by the proposed development. You can talk about gateways into downtown. The last one is incorporating more housing into the future downtown. So there are a number of these goals which are addressed by this development. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of shift into some of the more detailed review of the proposal. And so what I'll talk about now is the design. And so this kind of splits out into two main kind of areas of review. One is with the structure and looking at bulk standards or bulk regulations. These types of things include building height and impervious surface. And the second review is with more of an eye towards architectural detail. So from the bulk standard perspective, this building does vary in terms of its height. And the height is measured from grade, from the surrounding grade of the building. So in this case, the height does vary across the proposal from 44 feet to about 65 feet. The impervious surface or the lot coverage for this proposal is at 76.8%. That is under the allowed maximum for this area. The setbacks are not required in the central business district, so the reason for that is to bring buildings right up against the sidewalk to create a really engaging and inviting pedestrian atmosphere. So I'll just stop here and just say this elevation, again, that you're looking at on the bottom of the screen is from Rose Street. So you're seeing a couple different segments of the building. The segment here on the left of the screen, this would be right on Highway 5. This is retail space. As you transition to the north of the site along Rose Street, you go from retail to leasing or amenity area of the apartments, and then into more strictly just the residential units. So here again is that site plan. Move on to the next slide. So looking at the building materials and the design, one of the things that the downtown standards require is adaptation of details that are already in the community. It encourages this, it does not require it, I should say. So one of the things that the developer has looked to is the design precedent of existing structures within downtown Victoria. Things like the color of the material, the type of the material, the color of the material used on the facade, and then the size and location of retail space, entries, things of that nature. The city code does require entry design that reinforces visibility for those primary entrances to the building. We look at the ground level, specifically in downtown. We want to see a lot of windows and an area where it creates kind of a transition between the public space and the private realm. So it looks like this development meets that standard. However, I am proposing a condition of approval that requires the developer to just submit the calculation that shows us that. The same can be said for building materials. It appears that this proposal does meet the standard. However, we just want to ensure that it does. And lastly, color. The city code allows up to 2 primary colors, but doesn't define what those are. Staff are interpreting this project to have 3 of them. So we are saying that a deviation would be needed to that standard. And being that the building is kind of attempting to create a transition, it appears that that particular request is reasonable. So here's a couple different elevations. I just wanted to work through these before we go on any further. So the elevation on the top of the screen, this is what you would see directly head on from Highway 5, if you were looking at it from that angle. And then on the bottom of the screen is internal, what you'd see from the surface parking area in the middle of the site. On the next slide, on the top, this is what you would see if you were facing north from the inside of the site, and then on the bottom part of this slide is what you would see from basically the perspective of the trail. I would note that if you're looking at it from the trail, you would be a little lower, maybe 10 to 20 feet lower than the grade here, which is shown, just as a note for you. Okay, so that was some of the design review. There was a lot more detail that I provided in the staff report, and I'll be happy to answer questions on some of the design questions. I'm going to move on to the site plan review. So when we're looking at site plans, we're looking at things like parking, pedestrian connections and streetscaping, landscaping and tree preservation, and lastly, what and where in terms of signage. So in terms of parking, this is one of the things that we pay a lot of attention to, specifically with developments in the downtown area. And so I've got a lot of information on this slide, and I provided a number of different breakdowns. So on the top chart, or the top bit of information here, we have a breakdown of the parking stalls that are proposed for the site. So there's 3 different types of stalls provided, which are enclosed parking stalls, surface parking stalls, and the on-street. So the enclosed parking stalls would be actually under the footprint of the building. They're built underneath it. The surface stalls would be here, located in the center of the site, and then the on-street, obviously here on Rose. So in terms of how this compares to the city standard, the developer is requesting a deviation from a ratio of 2 parking stalls per unit to 1.5 parking stalls per unit. This is not uncommon in the city itself. The downtown west area does allow for 1.5 parking stalls per residential unit. There are other projects, including the Victoria Flats building, which have a lower ratio than that. And then the developer has provided a parking study, which does substantiate the request from market data and other analysis. But here's how those 2 will break down against each other. So the city standard would create a requirement for 250 stalls. And the city requirement, for if it were reduced to 1.5, would create a requirement of 188 parking stalls just for the residential units. So with a provided total of 258 stalls, just with the residential use, you're looking at 8 additional stalls on the site at a ratio of 2 to 1, and 71 additional stalls with a ratio of 1 to 1.5. So that is one thing that I wanted to break down for you. And lastly, if we use these ratios and consider that there would be retail uses on site, how many stalls would you have available with different uses? You can see I've broken them down here. If there were a showroom use in the entire retail space, you'd have 53 stalls available for public use after all is said and done, 39 with retail and service uses, 36 with office and medical, and 36 with art studios. So those are just an example of some of the uses which may take that space and how many parking stalls will be left over. So in terms of the site plan review, we also looked at the connections that are created through this development. One of the things that city staff are always reviewing for is making sure that there are kind of contiguous sidewalk connections throughout the downtown area. That is a very important part of being downtown. So this development is proposing a number of different things, including a 10-foot wide sidewalk north and south along Rose Street, crossings across Rose Street at Trunk Highway 5 and then mid-block. There are street trees and lighting proposed here, as well as making sure that the design meets the existing design standards downtown. One thing that staff are recommending, however, is that the developer include a crossing across Rose Street on the north side of this development where the cursor is currently moving. That would create kind of that last important connection to the rest of the downtown pedestrian network. Okay, so we looked at the tree preservation proposed here, and the developer was required to provide a plan showing where they would remove trees on site. You can see at the very bottom, encircled in red, is kind of the result of that analysis. At the end of the day, the developer would be required to mitigate 51 trees. That's 124.5 caliber inches. So staff have reviewed this and find that the math is right. However, what we do need to see, though, however, is a revised tree plan that shows the area of Elm Street, which didn't appear to be inventoried in this tree mitigation plan. So we'd want to know the types of species and the location of those trees in that area, as well as any trees which are on the boundary of the proposed project, so that we can know if there's any incidental tree loss, where those trees were and how large they were. Factor them into the calculation. The last thing is staff are proposing a recommended condition, if this is approved, to allow the requirement of mitigation of either plantings or cash in lieu, whatever makes the most sense. Okay, and then the landscaping. So the developer is providing 51 trees on this site. So it's a pretty tight site as it is located in downtown, and there's a lot of kind of lot coverage, but they're fitting in 51 trees. That is greater than the required 27 trees. Boulevard plantings are required in all zoning districts, and so that is one of the requirements that is not met entirely by this development. You'll notice they're meeting the boulevard tree requirement along Trunk Highway 5, but with the addition of the public parking stalls on Rose Street, the developer is requesting some flexibility from that standard. Lastly, foundation plantings all appear to meet the city code requirements. There is no open space required under city code for properties in the central business district. Okay, signage. So we did review the sign package or sign master plan proposed by the developer, and there are a few different signs proposed on the structure that would all be sort of designed similarly and fit into the master plan. So there's a large blade sign which is proposed on the facade facing Trunk Highway 5. There would be surface mounted lettering or wall signs along Rose Street, which would mark the retail spots. Small blade signs would be included as well. Those would also be associated with the retail uses and the entries. And lastly, an unknown at this time retail sign at the intersection of Rose Street and Highway 5. So we don't quite know what that looks like yet, so we did not have the opportunity to review for it. So I just wanted to provide a visual here to show what this signage would look like. So you're seeing the small blade signs on the screen. The cursor is circling one of them. The wall sign lettering is located a little further north along Rose Street. There is a public parking sign proposed, and since this would advertise for a public use, that is not something that we review for. So on this screen, it's kind of a lot of information again. This is all in the staff report. I just wanted to provide this. This is a list of the different deviations in total that the developer would be receiving through their PUD request. The last two likely may not be needed, but I wanted to identify them in the event that the percent that we end up getting as far as revised plans is different. So that is the summary of that. I wanted to talk about the shoreline overlay requests as well. So we have a conditional use permit request for both the commercial use in the shoreline overlay and the multifamily residential use in the shoreline overlay. This was identified, this process that we are going through with these requests was identified to staff when the project was sent to the DNR for their review. So with all subdivisions in the shoreline overlay, we send them to the DNR. We got the comment back on this process. The staff identified that a couple variances were needed associated with the multifamily residential in the shoreline overlay. One is to allow the development to be a density that is required by the comp plan. And the second is to exempt it from an open space requirement. I think it's important to note that the shoreline overlay doesn't really take the downtown area into great consideration with its residential PUD requirements. And so it imposes standards that really can't reasonably be met by developments, specifically in downtown Victoria. Residential developments, particularly because they are required by the comp plan to develop at one density and suggested by the shoreline ordinance to develop at another. So the purpose of this slide is just to show you where this project is located relative to water bodies that are recognized as public waters under the shoreline ordinance. And this next slide is to show you how that, well, number one, where this site is located in relation to the shoreline buffer, but also it kind of speaks to the extent that the shoreline overlay covers downtown Victoria. So the developer was required to provide a tiering analysis. This is where we identified the density variance was required. Again, the tiering analysis showed that they could only do 17.26 units per acre. That's not even meeting the city's density goals for the site. So that is why staff are supporting the variance request here for both lot cover or open space and density. So now I'm going to throw it over to the city engineer for a couple comments on some of the more engineering related items.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission, not City Council. I didn't know if it would ever be my turn, but I just have a couple of slides to run through with you. So first related to traffic, this slide here is from a draft traffic study that's been provided to staff for review. But before I highlight a couple details on it, what I do want to note is that back in 2018, the city did complete a downtown-wide traffic analysis after the downtown master plan was completed to understand how the proposed potential development occurring in downtown would affect really traffic within downtown and of course the key intersections in and out of downtown. So that was back in 2018. And then in 2021, we had the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan that I've shared with the Planning Commission previously. But that study took a look at needed transportation improvements throughout the city, but specifically relative to Highway 5, looking at Highway 5 from Chanhassen all the way through the intersection with Dairy Queen. And it did include a traffic study component that took into account the planned improvements for transportation network within the county, but of course planned development both within Victoria and in Waconia and area communities that travel through this area. So we have a pretty comprehensive look at what's needed. Everybody knows Highway 5 is congested. We have a plan that has been adopted and approved by the council and the county with support from MnDOT for making improvements to Highway 5. If Nate would let me, I could talk about that for an hour, but I won't. But specific to this project, we did require the developer to produce a traffic study that took a look at how much traffic would be generated from the proposed project. And the study is showing about 900 additional trips per day generated from the building. They did prepare the study looking at Rose Street ultimately being a right-in, right-out, because the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan does call for that access to be limited when the highway gets converted to 4 lanes. The reason they did that was modeling it that way would push more traffic into downtown today if you had that right-in, right-out, so really trying to take a look at the worst impact. So with that, you see about 500 additional trips going north to the intersection of Rose and Steiger Lake Lane, and then 340 over to Victoria Drive, and then a little bit of disbursement from there, of course, depending on where people are headed in the morning. For people who live and work in the existing downtown, you know, we do see some congestion at intersections at different points in time, and the intent is for people to slow down and move slowly and accommodate those conditions. But the proposed traffic is consistent with what one would need for a 2-lane road. So, you know, the roads that have been constructed in downtown were built to accommodate the proposed traffic. One finding from the traffic study, and something staff's been discussing, if this project were to move forward, we want to take a look at the intersection of Steiger Lake Lane and Rose through the city's stop sign warrant analysis. So our stop sign policy does provide for taking a look at different particular intersections to look at whether an always stop control would be warranted. With the change in traffic on Rose Street, as well as just the challenges with the sight distances coming off the bridge, which had to be there because of the building that now houses Ruby's Roost. We had to orient the bridge the way that we did back in 2002 to preserve that building. It does create some sight distance challenges, so we'd be taking a look at possibly adding always stop control at that intersection. The other thing that I want to highlight for the Planning Commission, though, also as well is, so the intersection of 5 and 11 by Dairy Queen did get funding for a roundabout that's planned for construction in 2025. The City Council just authorized the professional services related to that project. And as part of that project, we will do an updated traffic study specifically looking at the intersection of Steiger Lake Lane, Victoria Drive, and that will take into account anything that's planned currently within downtown, but more importantly, wanting to understand the effect of the 13.5 acres on these intersections. As I've shared with the Planning Commission previously, MnDOT would prefer to see the Steiger Lake Lane access to be a right-in, right-out only, and we want to understand as a city what the traffic implications would be of limiting that access to not be full. So, so we haven't identified any concerns with this added project other than the intersection that I noted, but there's a lot of potential traffic changes with the development of the 13.5 acres. So the City Council has authorized a study for that. We'll be kicking that off pretty quickly, and the public will start to see public engagement around that area in the next couple of months. So there'll be an opportunity for folks to learn more about that project. Then just specifically to the site improvements, what I want to highlight here is that when you look at this plan, you're not seeing any areas dedicated for stormwater management like you might see in a residential development. The reason for that is that they are connecting to the downtown regional stormwater system that we constructed first back in 2003 and then expanded through a grant in the probably like the 2018 pre-COVID timeframe. That's a little bit of a time warp in my brain for when the years were. But this land area was planned to be served by that stormwater management system. So they're proposing to connect to that. City staff is currently working with Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to work through what that permitting process looks like because they're tying into a regional system. So that's part of the planned improvements. And then for sewer and water, sanitary sewer and water is available in Rose Street that they would be proposing to connect to as needed to meet the demand for the building.
It's one building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I have another slide?
No, that's it.
That's it. Okay, thanks.
All right, back to me. Sorry, I'll try and be quicker this time. Park dedication. So this is required as projects, subdivisions come through the city's review process. Just noting here, this is actually from the city's website. There is a parks amenities map available. It's really nice. It shows you a bunch of different amenities across the city. I wanted to show this image just to give us a sense of the different park amenities that are available within pretty short distance from this project, and the reason why staff are suggesting cash in lieu of land dedication for this project specifically. Not included in this amenities map is the roughly 6 square miles of Carver Park Reserve directly north of this project. So this project, as mentioned, was routed through the city review process and provided to both internal and external reviewers. So internally, the fire chief has had an ability to review the project and did provide a comment on the location of a fire hydrant. That's been incorporated into the recommended conditions of approval. Public Works and Building Department have both had an opportunity to review the project and provide comments to staff and the developer. And then externally, there are a number of different agencies that have had the opportunity to review and comment on the project as well. The DNR did not have any comments after we worked through the administrative process. MnDOT did also provide a couple comments which were actually relatively minor. One comment was on noise from Trunk Highway 5, and the other was on provision of bike parking, being that they're on a trail. Minnehaha Creek, easy for me to say, had the opportunity to review this, and they are in process as far as I know. And lastly, Carver County and the Hennepin County Railroad Authority and Three Rivers Park District have also had the opportunity to review this. Those three agencies work together on the Minnetonka Regional Trail. So a number of different agencies have had the opportunity to review and provide comments. Lastly, we did notice for a public hearing this evening. So that should be held here with this request, and the applications that were noticed were the preliminary plat, preliminary PUD, the CUP, and the variances. So staff, in conclusion, are supportive of the request based on meeting the required conditions and criteria in the city code and its policies. Staff, if the Planning Commission looks to recommend this to the City Council, staff do have a number of different conditions which are recommended to go along with an approval. So we have roughly 20 of those. They're up on the screen. I've worked through a lot of them with you here this evening during the presentation. They're also in your staff report, so I won't go into great detail unless you have questions for me. We do have a sample motion up on the screen here if you have questions. Lastly, I would note that the developer and their team are here this evening to answer your questions, and they have some materials that are available to provide their perspective on the requests. So with that, I can stand for questions, or you can have the developer give the presentation.
Thank you. We will now have a brief presentation by the developer.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Marty McCarthy. I'm with Roars Companies. We're a Minnesota-based apartment developer. And just want to thank Nathan. That was a really great summary. We've been working for a long time on this project and really excited to be in the position that we're at. I'm going to keep it brief because I think you did such a great job summarizing everything. I'm here with our consultants, our design team. Jeff Reedy is with Momentum. They're the architect who's designed this building and the building that you can see out the window as well. Matt Pacina, traffic engineer with TC2, and then PJ Dish, our civil engineer with Laux. Do you want to go to the next page? So Roars Companies was founded in 2012 by Kent and Brian Roars. We are now developing apartments over a dozen states over the last 10 years. And we have been now just acknowledged within the last couple of weeks that we're in the top 200 workplaces by the Star Tribune, and I voted yes. It's a great company to work for. And then we're also, we were considered the Minnesota Real Estate Journal Best Developer, or the Developer of the Year in 2023. So some people have asked, why would we want to build apartments in Victoria? And this is a slide here that just shows the growth of the city, really post World War II, and it's just growing incrementally. I'm looking forward to seeing what those numbers show in 2030, because I think with a lot of the development that's in the pipeline, single-family homes around the city, that you'll continue to see a lot of growth. Next slide. And this is another reason why apartments are very critical to the city, because there's a major lack of apartments or rental housing in Victoria. So the United States, the household renters in the United States, 35% of households are renters. In the surrounding communities, Chaska, Chanhassen, Waconia, range from 13% to up to 30%. And Victoria is at 7%. So there's certainly an opportunity here to provide additional rental housing to meet unmet demand. And as the city continues to grow, that's just going to get, that number is going to shrink if we don't bring in more supply. So what I think is critical is Roars intends to be a really good neighbor on this project. And since we've been working with the city, we've been working with the community, and we've been really crafting a really great project. When we first came to the city and said we wanted to do this apartment project, the city encouraged us to do retail, and I questioned that, because every apartment developer is going to question, we don't want to have retail in our project. But then actually coming to the city and being more involved in the city and going to the restaurants and stuff, you really get to see that there's a really great opportunity here. There's not a lot of vacancy for retail. So we really decided to jump behind that and really think that's a great opportunity. And then I started meeting with the local business groups and the property owners in downtown, and their concern was parking. And so some of those things we've then incorporated into the project where we're at right now. And so we last presented at Sketch Plat and City Council workshop, and since that time, we've reduced the number of units from 149 units to 125 units, provided for additional retail from 4,500 square feet to 8,700 square feet on the request of the city. And then we're providing additional parking because of the reducing the amount of units allows for more parking to occur on the site. So we went from just 1.1% parking on for the apartments, which let me see here. And then, so that was 148 units in the building, and then just a 37 stalls on Rose Street, and that was meant for the apartment and the project. And so now we've transitioned to having significantly more parking available. It'll be over 1-to-1 parking underground, and then we'll have additional parking on the surface lot. That also allows us to then have retail parking on the surface lot and Rose Street as well. So on the retail side, we went from just having those 13 stalls on Rose Street to having 50 stalls in the parking lot and Rose Street. So significantly more parking for retail. I think that helps quench some of the concern of the local downtown businesses and just some of the neighbors who are concerned about not having enough parking on those high peak points of Fridays and Saturday nights. So this is what we presented at the last meeting, the sketch plat. Over time, we've worked with the city staff and have updated the design to what you saw earlier. And the idea here is that we're kind of trying to create a small town downtown. The other version had this bigger appearance of just one big large building. And in this new version, we really are breaking up that front facade facing Rose Street, facing downtown, into three different kind of nodes or different looking buildings. So I'm excited about this project. The Roars Companies is very excited about this project. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Reedy, and he's going to kind of go into how and where we were pulling some of these design elements from downtown, because we do want to keep Victoria that small town feel.
Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members, my name is Jeff Rady from Momentum Design Group. I'm the principal there, and then I'm here with Dylan Schoenfeld from our office, who's a team lead on the project, and Matt Haller, who is the associate. And so those are the two guys that did a lot of this work. I'm just the guy that gets to come up here and show you guys all the stuff that they did. So what I wanted to say to you guys is, in January, we took your comments and went back to the proverbial drawing board and took it from the building that you saw at the previous slide into what you see right here in front of us here. And we broke those, we broke the building down into three building ideas, similar to what we did across the street here at Victoria Flats. And we broke it up in mass, we broke it up in color, and we broke it up in materials. And we stepped it at the idea of the planning staff. We stepped it off of Highway 5 and stepped it back to 3 stories on the Highway 5, and then we raised it up in the center to 4 stories as we went further north to the northeast in order to maintain the 4-story apartment building. But you can see that on the slide that you have in front of here, we took cues from retail buildings that you have in town, and we incorporated them into the corner building here. You can see that the Winchester Rye building has a lot of brick, and it's heavy, and it's got some dark elements from the glass. We have a lot of detailing on that corner. We also had incorporated some arches into that building. And then most importantly, if you could go back one slide, the step backs are very important to providing an interesting visual experience to the people as they approach the building from Highway 5 and Rose Street. Maybe go to the next slide then. The center portion of the building is also stepped back from Rose Street as well. So you can see where we say retail, leasing, and what is the Victoria on the end there. So what we're doing there is we're stepping it back. We made the building thicker in order to provide retail, but also amenity space in the lobby and things like that for the apartment users. And that steps back to a 3-story element, which is the apartments beyond. And then if you can go, and we used, I'm sorry, go back to that. We used the inspiration from the Noble Lion on that portion of the building. And then the last one, of course, is the 4-story building portion with the lighter colors, and that is up at the northeast corner. And we were using elements off of the Victoria Flats building on that. So with that being said, we broke the long elevation along Rose Street into the 3 distinct architectural expressions and scales using color and visual interest cues. We stepped back from Highway 5, we stepped back from Rose Street, and we developed some really interesting architectural details on the corner building and the retail building and the northeast building. So that's what I have. If you guys have any questions for us, we'd love to talk to you guys more. Okay.
Thank you. At this time, I will now open the public hearing. I'll remind people that we do have a 3-minute window for comments, and so whoever is in the chamber that wishes to make a comment, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record, and The public hearing is open.
Hi, I'm Terry Hartman and represent tonight, my brother and I own 4 buildings in downtown Victoria, but at the same time, as Marty had mentioned, he's talked to a group of us downtown property owners a couple of times. And Tom Wortman is here from the Burrows, Mary Mavison with the Winchester and Rye building, Tom Almquist, who owns 1772, I think it is, and Paul Carlson with Vic's Bar and Grill. Several different times we had an opportunity to meet with Marty, and we really appreciate the fact that he made himself available, scheduled meetings with us, and as we brought up concerns about parking or other issues, that he's responded just about every time to the better with some of our concerns. And again, I want to say that we're, for the most part, the group of us have supported where he's at today. And we think with the density that he ended up with, the architectural design, which is fantastic, the way they've brought the height down and stepped it, and still maintain the number of units that they need to make the project feasible. They did a great job with that. I'm probably gonna forget a couple other items, but I don't wanna be too gushing that we're supporting it. We're hyper-focused on parking, so I wanted to say that first before getting into some of the parking issues. But the fact that he's close to 2.0 parking spaces per apartment unit, he's not there at 2.0, but he's either at 1.8 or 1.5. And I have a question for you that I know you guys don't engage in while we're standing up here, but why are we calling the proposal a 1.5 ratio versus what looks to me like it should be 1.8? If you simply take the number of parking spaces, subtract out what the staff report says for the retail requirement, baseline retail at around 32 units, that the ratio that they're coming in with actually is closer to 1.8. And we say that because many times as these proposals are coming in, new ones, they look back at one that was approved and they say, there's a precedent there that we need to call from. And I think we have to be careful what precedent we're setting. It appears like it's 1.8 and not 1.5. But either way, it's above other previous proposals that we've had some real hard times with recently. So we're happy with what they're providing, and we're happy that they're closer to that 2.0, and I could stop there. But this is our opportunity to talk about TIF. And again, I know you started the conversation with that TIF wasn't being discussed tonight, but I want to bring it up because this is a public hearing, and it's the only one for the project. So where we see projects like this that don't come in to meet the ordinance to the T, we think it's appropriate when this gets to the city council, when TIF is talked about, that a TIF component where the city gets to keep a percentage of, and I'll use the flats as an example, the city received 25% of the TIF, and that was to be used for public parking improvements.
I understand.
I think it worked well.
The TIF, I understand, Terry. I think that will come back at city council with a conversation at that point. And I don't really want to tie us down with discussing TIF at this time.
Right.
Because I think you'll have an opportunity to talk TIF with the city council. We have no discussion or ability to deal with any of that or make a recommendation with it or not. But TIF would come through as a hearing through, I would believe with city council, there would be some discussion with that.
Could staff
Yeah,
confirm that?
Mr. Chair, if I may, there will be a TIF hearing in July. The date has not been confirmed yet, and we have not confirmed the numbers yet with our financial advisor, so that's why we're not letting any TIF numbers be discussed at the moment. There will be, yes, in July.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else?
friends. Laura Moore, 2255 South Parkway. I just have a few quick questions. It would be ideal for us to understand a little bit more about the construction schedule. With the underground parking, that's gonna really eat up a lot of space, land area for a lot of the businesses for quite a while. That's my assumption. I'd like to just learn a little bit more about that, the logistics of that construction schedule. And also the units, and it's essentially as well. Signage. So we talked a little bit about the public parking sign. I would like to know a little bit more about that. I was kind of confused about your comment. I'd like clarity on the sign. Is the signage allocation for that public parking sign part of the overall signage, or is that in addition? I think that's a question I have. Just like a little more clarity, because I think retailers are going to want maximum signage. So just a little bit of information that would be helpful. Curious about the bays of the rental spaces, the retail spaces. Previously, what was proposed was fairly shallow, and so I'm just kind of curious on what they are being proposed. The square footage is increased from what was previously proposed, which is good. I'm just curious. Sometimes cities push design agendas, but it doesn't always work from a business perspective and from an operations standpoint. And so I'd like to know a little more clarity on that. For example, a small subway, the max depth might be 60 feet. So understanding how that compares. And then lastly, I'd like to understand a little bit about what kind of retailers the developer would be targeting. My hope is that they wouldn't be heavy parking users like restaurants and bars. It is close to Floyd's. We know that they take a lot of parking, and with the opportunity of more public parking, it's gonna bleed into those customers. So that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Robert Pollack, 1776 Steiger Lake Lane. I'm still kind of amazed that, you have these 35-foot height restrictions, and then you show us the drawing when you have, well, at least towards Steiger Lake Lane, they're 65 feet in height, and then if you're down at the trail level, you got another 10 feet. So you're looking up at this, monolith, 75 feet height difference. So I think the idea of keeping it in accordance with the 35-foot regulation is kind of a joke. I think my main problem with the whole thing is, before we have the roundabouts at the Dairy Queen and at the firehouse, you quoted a figure, the city engineer quoted a figure of 500 additional people or trips on Rose Street, I think it was. I drive out Steiger Lake Lane and take a ride on Victoria Drive every morning, and 500 more trips. I think that'll be like a nightmare trying to get in and out of Rose Street for those people. And then the other question I had was on the drawings from Roars, you guys talked about 3-inch trees, that you would cut down all the mature trees on the south side of the trail, but then you'd put 3-inch trees, and I assume you're talking about 3-inch diameter trees at the bottom, and I don't know what that means in terms of height. Are we talking like 6-foot trees, and are we talking about evergreens, that kind of thing? Because we don't want to be looking at this huge wall for the rest of our lives over in Steiger Lake condos. So it would be nice to have mature trees and maybe a whole row of them rather than 3-inch, whatever that means. So those are my comments on that.
Thank you.
Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Tom Wortman, Victoria Borough. I'd like to just second what Terry had to say about the communication that Marty has had with the downtown business owners and been willing to meet and see the concerns that we've had, and I think the aspect of what staff has developed with them in the stepping back and the scale of the size and the quality of the building design has been very positive, as well as dealing with some of the parking issues that we are heavily concerned with, and in engaging and really getting account of the parking that really does come in at 1.8 for the apartments, and using the 32 spaces for the 8,700 square feet of retail. So very much support what he's doing, and I think as we get into a TIF discussions, we can also see that as the flats did, we'll see some help there for future development for more downtown parking too. Thank you.
Any other comments? Not hearing any. No more. I would like to ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
Second.
A motion made by Commissioner Iverson and seconded by Commissioner Riccius. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. The public hearing is now closed. I will now open the floor to the Planning Commission to discuss questions or make comments. I guess we could address the questions about the construction series, what you're thinking, timeframe.
Again, for the record, if there is a record, my name's Marty McCarthy with Roars Companies. We are planning right now to have a 16 to 18 month construction period. And we'll be putting together a phased plan with the city, a staging plan. This site, there will be a lot of space to be able to do a lot of the work on site and have some equipment on site, so that we're trying to stay off of Rose Street for some time, but we'll likely have to have staging occurring on Rose Street. And so that may have to be closed for a little while, but that won't be taking up a lot of parking because that staging would all occur. All of that has to be negotiated with the city still. We're still very early on in the conversations, but it is a big site and we can do some staging on the inside of the property. So yeah, that's all I have right now. But we'll do everything we can to work well with the city and make sure that there's as minimal impact to the community as possible.
And then size of retail, depth.
Sure.
All right, so the retail is in two different places. It's on the building that's closest to the highway, and that's a pie-shaped building, so it's fairly narrow at one end. It's 30 feet deep at one end, but it grows to 65 feet deep at the other end. And then there's another building which is on the other side of the drive-through, which is about 65 feet deep as well. Okay. As far as the height of the building off the bike trail, it is approximate at the northeast corner. It's approximately 60 feet tall, and at the northwest corner, it's approximately 65 feet tall. A lot of that had to do with the requirements of the retail portion being on the southeast corner. Retailers need more height. We need the second floor to always be at the same exact elevation for handicap accessibility, hence the height of the building. So in addition to that, fire departments needed the 13.6 to drive underneath the building as well. So that's the reason why. It's just the math, unfortunately. So, okay. There was a question on the sign.
I think it was on
the
the
parking lot sign being part of the allowed signage. I can't really answer that, but on every other project I've ever done, we always have to go back in for a sign permit at the end of the project. So what we're showing on there is artistic rendering. Really what it's going to come down to is when we do identify a retailer, they will ask for signage and it'll all be based on the city ordinance. We then draw that up, submit it to the city staff. City staff says yes or no, that meets the ordinance. So, okay.
As far as the, as far as the retail and Roar's out looking for retailers, we typically don't hire a retail broker until the building starts being built. And the reason behind that is retailers aren't going to sign a lease until there's maybe a couple months until they move in. So likely we will start working with a broker in maybe 2 or 3 months after we start construction, just so that they can see that the building is occurring and all of that, and that there's a timeline that they know that they can move into. We have been working with a broker to kind of help lay out the retail space and help us identify if we're missing anything. We're looking through the design with them and identifying where shafts would go for any kind of plumbing or HVAC equipment and stuff like that. So that's what I have on the retail outreach. And then as far as height of trees go, yeah, the three, I was talking to PJ, our civil, and he said that those 3-inch caliper trees would be about 6 to 8 or 10 feet tall when they start out. And so we will do as much as we can to preserve a lot of the trees, but we are overplanting, like Nathan said, significantly. So we are excited to continue with this project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got one question for you.
Yeah.
When we were discussing this last time, we talked about sidewalk going along Highway 5 all the way down to the LRT. It doesn't look like you included that. Was there reasons behind that?
Making a connection to the LRT trail.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a significant slope that occurs.
Okay.
And the city wants to require an ADA accessible connection. I think it's the city and.
Yeah, sidewalk all the way along Highway 5 up until, boom, your
Yeah.
location.
And then
Just
there's
seems like-
also a storm water system that we're bringing over, and so just the slopes made it impossible to make that work. And we worked with the county, the light rail district, the transit district city engineer, and even we're looking at opportunities to maybe bring it off the site just a little bit and come down the retaining wall, and just couldn't figure out how to make that work. So
And then you throw in the fact you've got the Arboretum highway system coming through in the next 3 to 4 years too to mess it all up. So anyway, I was just curious how you were looking at that.
Yeah, we looked hard at it, and the reality is we're 2 blocks away from the main connection in downtown, and I feel like it's a great opportunity for just to get our residents into downtown, walk by the ice cream shop, and
Yeah, this comes up a lot too, especially with new federal legislation. What are you doing for electric chargers within your resident location?
absolutely, yeah. We are proposing to start out with 10% of the units would have a corresponding electrical vehicle charging station.
Like the 240 volts or the 120, or what would you?
I believe we would go with the 240, and then we're proposing to do a surface EV charging station. It could be a dual one, and it'd be a high-speed charging one that would be out towards where we would say the retail parking would be kind of more inboard on the surface lot. So that would be available to the public.
Great. Those are my questions on those ends for that. What do other people have?
I have a question for you. As far as the residential units go, can you give me a rough idea of the size and the the amount of
Sure.
1, 2-bedroom or square footage?
Yeah, generally, we're around 900 square feet on average. That's the average of all of them. Jeff, do you have the breakdown? Yeah, we've got studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s.
I don't know if we have it broken down. We're broken down by floor, unfortunately.
Do you have
We have a
the,
mix of studios, 1, 2s, and 3s.
do you have the median square footage?
No, just we usually just look at the average square footage.
So, I mean, we can get it to you, I just can't do the math right in front of you guys
Appreciate
right
it.
now. So. Okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Just a few comments. The design and aesthetics have come a long way since January 17th.
Thank you.
And good work on that. Glad to see that happening. The parking, as everyone states, is an issue, remains an issue. There, quite frankly, will never be enough parking. But, I think the standards that were set, we really do want to hold to that. At the same time, the traffic routing, and that's kind of interesting because going from Rose Street to Victoria Drive to get onto Highway 5 will be the path of the least resistance. And that's probably a bigger number than what has been stated, with right in, right out configuration. True?
Yeah, if it's helpful, I can speak to, it's probably important to make sure that the record was clear on some of those numbers. So Nathan, if you want to pop back to the traffic study slide. So, and the traffic engineer is here too, if we want to go into greater detail. But the model that was prepared assumed a right-in, right-out. So took a look at the way traffic would distribute from the site with a right-in, right-out only. And it isn't a right-in, right-out today. The improvements to 5 within downtown are a ways out within the downtown area. But he modeled it that way because that would be a worst-case scenario. So that showed on an average day, 515 cars going to the intersection of Steiger and Rose Street. But the traffic analysis, what I didn't touch on, does take a look at the AM peak period. So, the reference to when you're trying to get out in the morning, how much worse is the traffic at that under those conditions. And so these little bubble circle areas speak to what additional traffic would be seen at the intersection in the AM peak and the PM peak. So in the morning, the study is showing an additional 26 cars making the right-hand turn onto that intersection. Certainly, that is more traffic than is there today, but development continues to occur on the 13.5 acres. We anticipate traffic increasing on Steiger Lake Lane. The downtown streets are constructed, 2 lanes, 1 in each direction, that can accommodate, per the traffic study, up to 8,000 cars per day. The current traffic on Steiger Lake Lane is, depending on where on the corridor in which year, the numbers vary a little bit based on condition, but a couple thousand cars. So we really do want to look at that broader traffic study that takes into account the 13.5 acres as well. So that's partly why I noted that here today. But yes, so there will be an increase in traffic at that intersection with any development that would occur on this property compared to its use today as a, site and a handful of homes, so.
I have an answer for the gentleman on percentages.
Oh.
That's all right.
You get your, John, is that fine?
Yeah, go ahead. I've got one other thing, but go ahead.
Okay, just to address your comment, 1 bedrooms, we have 51%, alcoves, we have 7%, 2 bedrooms, we have 31%, and 3 bedrooms, we have 8%.
Thank you very much.
It's a little bit heavier on the larger units. We're starting to see that now. After COVID, we're starting to see less studios and more 1s and 2s.
Got it. Thank you.
The only other comment that I would make is the presentation by Terry Hartman. I think essentially representing the neighbors in downtown. And when we look at a big project, there's a lot of people that have some ownership in this. And it has to work for the other neighbors downtown. So I'm glad to hear the feedback at the same time and the research that went into to get to that point. So I think everyone has done a due diligence on that. So thank you.
You know, I'd like to make a comment that, you know, this project is a big project. It puts a highlight on what downtown is. And there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it, and I appreciate, that they've talked to the businesses and are trying to work through this, but, you know, this, when it gets built, it's built. It's not gonna, you can't just tear it down and start over. So again, what we gotta do, we need to make sure that it's right for everybody. Right for the businesses, right for the residents, right for what the city vision is. And, you know, what do we want our city to look like down the road, you know? And, you know, I hear a lot of people like you hear, we like the small town, quaint, quiet town feel, and that's kind of what we're looking after, and they came back with a great feel for that. And I'm glad that they did reach out to businesses and talk to everybody, and staff went through a lot with them, I'm sure. So again, but I don't know, you know, residents, I don't know, the Steiger Lake condos, but that's what we need to hear from, and staff and council, and we're glad everybody's here tonight. So I appreciate you taking time out to do that. Anybody else?
I got city questions.
Okay.
First and foremost is I know there was a substantial amount of this is actually going back, there was a substantial amount of cleanup that had to be done at that site. Has that been estimated and determined how involved that's going to be or not? Sorry, this should have been one of my other 3 or 4 questions.
No, not a problem at all. We have hired a consultant who, environmental consultant, has done testing on the site. And so there may be some contamination in the buildings. And then we have identified contamination in the soil as far as petroleum leaching from the gas station across the street from a previous release. And then there's some bad soils where our building would be sitting. And so we have to use specific construction methods to put piers down into a grade that is more suitable.
Yeah.
So there is some cleanup that needs to be occurring, and we're working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to work through a remedial action plan. So in case we do find other issues in the soil as we start digging, that there's a strategy to mitigate those things.
Okay.
We are currently in the process of that. And so we have to first work with the state agency to figure out what they're going to require us to do, and then we can come up with pricing.
Great. Just want to make sure that's out there.
Yep.
I think it's another positive for the facility as well.
Thank you.
City stuff. We go through water restrictions and all sorts of stuff like that, adding this and possibly another 1,000 domiciles here in the next couple of years. How's our water going to work?
Sure. So, Commissioner Pedersen, the city's water system is designed and planned for continued population increases. And so, well number 6 is under construction, the pump house. But I do want to take the opportunity to highlight that our challenge with the water system is not new people moving to the community, it's the amount of irrigation that we use during a drought. So, anything people can do to be more mindful of their water use is certainly a benefit to the system as a whole when we're in drought conditions like we are again this year.
I was just gonna say, just like right now. All right, I just wanted to make sure that was out there. I'm never a fan of traffic studies because they're always done in a vacuum, and we have a lot of different projects coming up, and then we got construction coming up with the Arboretum, transit plan and all that. But I did want to address, one person was asking about the numbers, and you had a very detailed number within it. I broke it down to, in 6 hours, you're going to have 1.25 extra cars per minute. You break that down in half, in 3 hours, you'll have an extra 2.5. So it's not a ton on an island, but I understand with some of the other things that may be happening that traffic in this area is going to increase a lot, and during construction, it's going to increase even more. I saw Fire Chief Hager's information regarding the fire plug around here that needs to go in, but with the height going along Steiger Lake Lane, do we need some sort of different fire truck, ladder truck, or one of those things?
Commissioner, the fire chief did have the opportunity to review this development both at the concept plan phase and now through this proposal. And really the requirement is to make sure that the building height on Rose Street is tall enough to get an emergency vehicle. And so my understanding is that the city's existing equipment can fit under that opening if it's built as proposed.
Okay, I just want to make sure we can rescue people out of the 4th floor if we need to do that. Again, I don't know, it's not my concern, but I didn't see anything in the staff report about it, so I wanted to make sure it got addressed. The other thing would be, I don't know, I was part of the group that put together the recent shoreland ordinance, and it's not 40 years old, it's not 20 years old, it's 3 years old. So there was a lot of time and effort put into studying that. The shoreland ordinance isn't put in place to make it difficult to do business in the CBD. It's put in place to protect the 13 lakes that are in the city of Victoria and where they all end up going. It's drinking water, not for us, we're gonna be fine, but what does it do in 25 years? Are we cleaning up again? So I just want people to think about that while we're going through and essentially going against the DNR's recommended ordinance for our city for 4 different lakes. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it's something that should be addressed, and it should factor into what people think about when they're making their decision on what they want to do with this. I think that's it. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Well, I think comment-wise, you know, it was from the first view of what we saw back in January, it does seem like a lot of the issues were addressed in terms of both what the community's thinking about it, and I know that not everyone is satisfied with probably the north side of the building in the height, and that's going to be there as a legacy, but I think in terms of what is on, you know, Highway 5, what is Rose Street, adding the more parking, including more residential or retail, there was a lot of thought, it seems like, into what this reproposed solution is, and again, it's trying to find that balance between what the comp plan is laying out for the next 20 years and trying to find that compromise that this kind of is the city's plan in many regards, and it seems much more accommodating after going through kind of engagement with the businesses and others to come up with something that's more workable. Aesthetically, it looks more appealing as well. I'll be honest, the white was kind of contrasting when I saw the first iteration. So, yeah, I think a lot of the other more detailed questions have been addressed. But overall, it's looking like it's moving in the right direction from my perspective. So, nice job.
Commissioners, hearing no more discussion, I will ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend City Council approve the preliminary plat PUD, CUP, and the shoreline variance requests by Roars Companies for the Victoria mixed-use development with the conditions and the findings proposed by staff.
Motion made.
I'll second.
Yeah, motion made by Commissioner Ream, second by Commissioner Sequoia. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, the motion carries. That concludes that discussion item for this evening. Moving on to the miscellaneous section of our agenda. Are there any miscellaneous items from staff?
I just have one, Chair, members of the commission. I just wanted to let you know that we have a new staffer here. We have Brian, who's our new city planner, so you'll see him at the meetings moving forward.
Welcome.
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 Sorry, just letting the traffic flow. But that's all I have from staff.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any miscellaneous items for tonight?
Not really, but just like thinking about some of the other projects that are going on and projects like this, if we ever get into a situation where there is a parking situation, I'm just thinking like do things creatively, and there's other projects we'll throw out. The existing parking lot, there's ideas about adding parking along that. Can we get one of these other projects to pay for it rather than having, the city pay for it or the people pay for it or, the businesses? Or I know there's a parking pile that all the businesses contribute to. Is there a way to offset some of the parking space regulations with money as instead of parkland dedication or tree planting, you have to contribute $50,000 to the parking fund or whatever that is. I don't think we've used that in the past like that, and perhaps that can offset things for the future. So, we have a couple $100,000 in there to be able to use towards different projects down the road if organizations don't necessarily hit those numbers. Anyway, just a thought as I was sitting here. There's probably something legal against it, but who knows? Anyway, that's all.
Good point.
Good point. I guess the other point, and I don't know, Nate, you could probably should, the parking count that Terry was talking about, is it,
Answer that question.
is it one? Yeah, go ahead.
So the developer is requesting, or is still requesting 1.5 parking stalls to a residential unit. They provided, we're shutting the door. They provided a parking study which included a number of different sources of information. One of them was market conditions and looking at other similar projects and the amount of parking that they needed in all reality. And so they used market conditions analysis. They also looked at the uses within the structure and the peaks of the demands for parking of those uses. And ultimately, through all of that review, concluded that a parking ratio of 1.5 parking stalls per residential unit was what the development needed to park itself just for the residential uses. And so that is the support that they provided for that request of 1.5 stalls per unit from the city's perspective, and why that is actually perhaps could be seen as a benefit is the developer is providing 258 stalls of parking on the site. And so the less parking that needs to be reserved solely for the residential use, the more public parking is available for everyone else. And so in this case, the majority of the required parking for the residential use is enclosed, it's underground. The rest of the stalls that are needed for the residential parking would be just a part of the surface parking lot that's on the inside of the site. And so in this case, there will now be a pool of public parking stalls available in the middle of the site where that surface parking lot is. And then there's also the parking stalls that are being created by the developer on Rose Street. So in all reality, what this allows for the city to do is to increase the number of stalls that are available to the public. And we have the justification through the parking demand analysis to understand that the residential parking should be self-sufficient with what they have provided at 1.5 per unit. So that is kind of the background to that review and part of the staff report.
Right. Any other items? Hearing that there's no more items to come before the commission this evening, commissioners, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Got a motion made by Commissioner Iverson, seconded by Commissioner Ream. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.